So the last video I made on this subject, I got somewhat cut off by my friend's phone call, but I didn't want to just re-upload the whole thing again. Um, Apologies for that. It's always a bit irritating, but I more or less laid out the gist of what I want to say in that video. In this video, it's still related to the subject, but it's a bit more of a personal account, which actually I'd intended to make in that video, but here we go. Um, when I put forward my views on crime and justice, I'm acutely aware of the fact that I come across as a hardliner. And I've thought about this. I thought about how I can be perceived. And I'm okay with it. I would rather be seen as blowhard on this subject than in myself to not stand up for my conviction for that. So, back in 2000, when my family first came to England, um, and I'm going to go into some details here, but not absolutely every nuance of it. We settled in an inner city area of Sunderland. I'm not going to name the area because it's not my intention to try and, you know, defame the place or anything like that because I want to add something to that. But suffice to say, it was a well known inner city area of Sunderland with a long history. So, not necessarily a housing estate, but it was a rough area, and it had a reputation for being rough. This came on my dad's job. My father at the time was involved in the mission to seafarers, so he was serving as the industrial chaplain for Sunderland. I don't want to digress with the details of his job, but basically, it's a clerical job in which it's kind of like a hands-on aspect of the community, whereby a clergyman represents a port city and is involved with sailors and so on. Sunderland, of course, has greatly declined today, but there was still that capacity. But he also done a lot of routine church work with that. He was the local rector in Sunderland, and I think it's fair to say, relatively prominent figure in this city. He had a column in the local newspaper for a while, and he was well known by many people, prominent people in the city. Um, anyway, over time, things were good to start off with. I joined a local youth club. I would have been 14 at this time. I joined a local youth club, and it was great. It was all a new experience, and for the first few months, things were okay. But over time, things started really going badly wrong. And there's no single trigger for this. There's no single point where I could say this is where it began. But it soon became clear we were not welcomed by a lot of people because we stood out due to our accent, and also due to the fact the house physically stood out. Now, it wasn't some big, massive mansion, but it was associated with the job and it physically stood out in that area. It was a semi detached house, whereas, surrounded by terrace houses. It was just opposite the historic church in that area, and it physically stood out. Um, so, what followed from would have been mid 2000 to early 2002 was a long, long experience of constant harassment from local kids. We had windows smashed in. I was physically assaulted several times. Um, and it just became clear that we were not welcome there. And this was a situation that was getting out of hand. It got to the point where, we tried to install CCTV. It got to the point so bad that a police officer actually stayed with us overnight. That's the point that they'd gotten to. And that seemingly didn't act as much of a deterrent. In the end, my dad took the decision we had to move because things just got out of hand. Now, on one occasion, and I have to be careful what I say here because could be easily misunderstood. But we were desperate, and we decided to take photographs of people who were throwing stones through our windows. Some of the kids who were doing that as evidence, to show to the police. This got misunderstood. Oh, you're photographing kids. It got misunderstood, and we got targeted as a result badly. That was a total misunderstanding. We were. It was actually me and my brother. We took pictures in order to try and get evidence of what they were doing. Um, they could have been used in any upcoming trial or anything like that. But it got misunderstood, and that just got rapidly out of hand. So we had to move. We had to move. Anyway, that experience, when you are literally frightened of leaving your own home, and there's no point being bravado about it. I was frightened. You know, I was frightened if I went out, would I be targeted? Would I be beaten up? Remember one day I got a snowball in my face, but there was stone or something inside because I felt the impact of it. And a crowd of local kids would have been about my age from the youth club had gathered around. Now, some of them were friendly enough with me, but this was a point where there was a mob mentality turning against us because we were outsiders. And I remember very angrily sort of saying, "Who done that?" And this was outside my own house. A mob had actually gathered outside our house. There's no exaggeration. Um, and unless you've been through that sort of situation, you can't really know what it's like. And looking back, it's quite remarkable. Me and my family actually went through that. My parents don't really talk about it these days, but they must have went through enormous stress. I remember my younger sister, she was only, at the time, she would have been, I guess, 11, 10 or 11. I remember one day she was in floods of tears just from the fear. People trivialize putting a brick through a window, but a brick can be a lethal weapon, and if someone is on the other side, it could kill a person. It really irritates me when we hear about riots and stuff that bricks are somehow seen as trivial. They're not. They can be lethal weapons. Anyway, we did move out, thank God, and things greatly improved, obviously. But I remember an overwhelming sense of, my dad contacted the police, he went to the press, he done everything that he thought would help the situation. Going to the press didn't help. But I definitely don't blame him for doing that because he was making the point that other victims, he wasn't doing it just for us, he was doing it to try and highlight awareness of problems in this country. And my father's not particularly conservative. In fact, he'd call himself socialist in a lot of things. But he wanted to say that people need to speak out. So he was trying to give a voice to other people as well. And I really admire him for that. At the time, as a teenager, I was deeply frustrated. I was thinking, well, why can't we just move? But of course, it's not that simple. But we did. And so that experience, this wasn't just like, the thing is, if you, for example, had your bicycle stolen or had your phone stolen, it's a major inconvenience and it can be very frustrating, stressful. And if you've had something sentimental stolen, that's particularly bad. But a one off sort of crime, a one off experience of crime, doesn't compare to living with it, to literally being surrounded by yobs, people who want to drive you out of your own home. And as bad as our experience was, I know there's people who've went through even worse. The famous case of Fiona Pilkington, the woman in Leicestershire, about 10 years ago, she and her disabled daughter were driven to distraction by local yobs. The police failed to do sufficient work on that, failed to take it seriously, and they ended up taking their own lives. It was a very sad situation. The Gary Newlove case in Greater Manchester, I forget the specific town now, but the family man who was murdered by yobs, and his wife has courageously, in my opinion, become a prominent figure in the campaign for greater justice in this country. Richard Taylor, Damilola Taylor's father. So there are brave examples of people who have been through these sort of experiences and been advocates for victims of crime. But anyway, I remember at the time feeling frustrated with the police, but looking back, I think the police probably done everything they could. But in our case, a lot of the people targeting us were under 18. They were young offenders. So um, it just had a very deep impact. Now, I've been to that area since, and I think it has greatly improved. I kind of put myself in a situation. I mean, I hadn't been there in 15 years, and I thought there's kind of this bridge in that part of Sunderland that connects it to the city centre. If you live in Sunderland, you probably have some idea of where I'm talking about. I don't want to name the area because I don't want to give the impression I'm trying to just give it a bad reputation or something. But yeah, it has improved, and I kind of pushed myself to go through there. I reasoned, well, 15-year-olds on, no one's going to recognise me. I want to challenge myself. Maybe that was reckless on my part. I was also doing it partly as a shortcut because I want to get to the port of Sunderland for the tall ships event. Nothing happened, but I could see my old house and it brought back memories. It was it's something that really shaped my life, and it has given me the views I have on crime because I am absolutely adamant that when people are targeting others in that sort of way, the idea that the left have of dealing it dealing with it like conflict resolution is just utterly absurd. It's it's not. Um, so I know that I come across as a hardliner when it comes to crime, and I make no apology for that. I absolutely just have to take that position. I don't particularly enjoy it, right? I don't enjoy getting angry over crime. But if you are, I would question anyone that can see something like a gang beating up an individual or, situations like that and not feel anger. I really do question the moral compass. I'm not saying they have to agree with me on every aspect of this, but if you cannot bring yourself to feel anger at that sort of crime, like say a mob or a gang attacking an individual, or say a woman getting raped at knife point, or a young family dealing with an arson attack, those sort of crimes, I firmly believe we need a new specific crime to deal with gang behaviour. To deal with because I think if you get an individual who commits assault, that's still bad, and I had that. I remember one day I was leaving my house and this guy was all tensed up. He looked angry, and he just next minute I know I've been punched. He didn't break my jaw, but it was sort of don't know if I'd say dislocated, but I couldn't close my mouth properly for a while. So he didn't quite break my jaw, but it wasn't far off for no reason. He wasn't trying to mug me. I think the police said, "Oh, it was a case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time." He was angry about something, and he just took it on me. Maybe he'd had an argument with his father, whatever. But people who attack strangers, I sometimes wish at the time I'd been interested in boxing and I'd thought about taking it up then, and I didn't. My mum didn't want me to do it, and I regret that. I did, dabble in it later on. I had my charity fight. I went to the gym a bit, but I sort of regret not following it at that time to some extent. But who knows? Life works in mysterious ways. Anyway, I'm going to round this up, but all I would say is this: Tony Blair once said that it is the personal experiences that shape people's ideology. He was very much an advocate of that viewpoint, and I agree. It is very true. If you if you're shaped by ideology, I mean, if you are, it's life experiences that shape ideology more often than not. And I find a lot of those who have a very lenient attitude to crime. I'm not going to say they've never been victims of crime, but I don't think there will be many people who went through what I went through, and there's others who went through much, much worse, who would have an attitude that doesn't put justice at the heart of the solution. And for justice, there needs to be punishment. If there's no punishment, then there's no justice. Punishment isn't fickle. Punishment isn't punitive. Punishment serves a very specific purpose of laying out fairness, action, consequence. That's what it's about. I'll round this up. Um, yeah. What else can I say? I don't want to go into further. I will say this: I don't want to go into too many more further details about my experience. I've said quite a lot. Feel free to tell me if you've had any experiences. I mean, I've no. It's not that I've got security concerns. 15 years, well, 17 years later, but I just. I have a slight concern about sort of going into too many details about something that was so personal. But I felt I had to talk about that to lay out why I feel the way I do. So next time you see someone and they seem to be really enraged about something, you need to think, what's led them to that way of thinking? Because it may well be personal experience.